Welcome back, dolls, to Music Corner. As always, I am your host, Lavender, the eepiest girl on music YouTube. It's been a while since I made a new video. It's been like a whole month. I've been busy moving and being on Umru's Twitter feed. But I wasn't going to miss my regularly scheduled update video where we talk about some of the biggest, best, and also most disappointing albums that I heard in the past 2 months. So we're going to get right into it, covering albums and EPs, stuff that I have reviewed in July and August, basically everything since I made my best albums of the year so far video around the midpoint of the year. It includes some stuff in late June, bunch of stuff in July, bunch of stuff in August. We're going to start with some records that kind of let me down that I wasn't crazy about. So back in July, I did this big recap review of some of the biggest rap albums that had come out in the year so far, and they weren't great as a bunch, but there were some particular ones that I was either hoping would be better or just particularly found as being a letdown. With the biggest letdown of the bunch being the new Lil Uzi Vert album, Pink Tape, which I guess I do like more than Eternal a Take, but I don't know, what I appreciate about Uzi going into their own unique stylistic lanes on this project is sort of undone by how inconsistent and half-assed this thing feels. Obviously, this album is way too long. It is packed full of duds, unsurprisingly, as many of these bulky hip-hop records are, and also some of these collaborations are really just Uzi handing off the mic to more impressive artists to completely one-up them and take the stage, which I don't really get. I'm not really sure the sound of this album is as cohesive as some of its defenders seem to think it is, and as a result, I'm just left with another Uzi album that I feel like I don't really get it. Even though I have never really liked a single project in Gunna's career thus far, I had an interesting journey with his new album, A Gift and a Curse. The first time I listened to this thing, the night it came out, I left kind of optimistically. While I wouldn't call it introspective, it is certainly a reflective album and one whose sonic reservation mirrors that. And I also saw some notable critics out there directing praise to this thing. It seems like it has the potential to be one of Gunna's best projects yet, and then I just dug into it deeper and deeper and found the really homogeneous sound of this album dry, dreary, and uninspired. And every time I finished a listen through of this project, I realized the most memorable points are when Gunna is at his worst. First of all, I think he continues to be the worst lyricist in all of contemporary hip-hop. Not that the bar is set very high in that standard, particularly with radio rap music, but Gunna just has a way of writing lyrics that are so bad that I can't really even ignore them. And that's why even on songs on this project that I think are decent, or that I have come around to a little bit, like the big hit song Fuck You Mean, which I've heard a million times, the most memorable points of the track have nothing to really do with its sonic elements. They're just when Gunna says something so impossibly lame that I can't believe he even released it. And yet, now that I think about it, as a sign of just how unimpressive Gunna's discography has been up to this point, this really might still be my favorite Gunna project yet, even given all of the criticism that I've directed it and the fact that I don't really even like it. Though it's very much not my favorite project from King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard with their new album, whose obnoxiously long title I am not going to say. After being a pretty big fan of King Gizzard for quite a while, their legendary 5-album 2017 run, which was really, really impressive and a lot of really memorable material came out of it, I have started to fall by the wayside with the band. The last King Gizzard album I really, really liked was their indulgence into thrash metal on Infest the Rat's Nest, and since then it has been an extreme overindulgence in my least favorite of their sonic motifs, the microtonal desert rock, before a return to form that didn't really impress me all that much. But I actually was really excited for them to return with this new project because they were going to continue to dive into the well of thrash metal that I thought they did so interestingly the last time. And yet, coming away from this record, it just feels like so much of the time was wasted without the immediacy that its predecessor has. This is a much more progressive, much more expansive take on the thrash metal sound than they took on their last project. And while King Gizzard has certainly done things like that impressively before on albums like Quarters and Polygon Wonderland, this is not it. It's so indulgent. It's so occasionally wankerous. It feels long and expansive without poise and for no good reason. I do think that there's like a 20-minute EP's worth of absolutely kick-ass music on this project. It's just not presented that way, and it's not nearly as impressive as any of the band's actual best material. Transitioning from albums that I was disappointed by into albums that I was more mixed or even positive towards, starting with the new King Cruel project, which came out in late June and received quite a bit of love from a lot of people, and I found myself enjoying the previous King Cruel project for the very first time. It was the first time I came away from a King Cruel album and enjoyed it a lot, which is why going into this I was excited, and while I don't find this record as good as its predecessor, I do think it's Archie's second best project as King Cruel for sure, and a lot of that comes from the lyrical and thematic content of this album. I am such a sucker for the songwriting motif that is just dancing at the end of the universe, and that attitude is so persistent all over this project. So while I do find it sonically quite underwhelming, like a lot of King Cruel's earlier work, I do think that conceptually he is hitting on some really very interesting things here that make the album worth digging into. Around the same time, legendary Icelandic post-rock band Sigur Ros, however it's supposed to be said, returned with a new album of their own, one that I was really excited to get into because of the way that it was described by critics and by a press release when the album initially dropped. This take on post-rock that leaned very heavily into ambient music despite the extensive orchestration and arrangement of performers that were playing on the album. And as someone who has often really appreciated minimalism and loves some of the most stark tracks in this band's past, I was really excited for that. But coming away from this album, it was just okay, just mixed. I like a lot of the ideas here. I like some of the lasting impressions that some of the best and most dramatic tracks make, but while this project does often get minimal, I find that it rarely gets fascinatingly stark or reserved. It is often just plain quiet, which is fine. I wanted to like this new Queens of the Stone Age project in Times New Roman after I saw some interesting buzz for it, and some of the singles started to grow on me with repeat listens. And I don't dislike it. I certainly see plenty of merit within these songs, but once again, I find Queens of the Stone Age, just like their last album, at this arc in their career, performing very corny, very dated styles of blues rock that are often an instant turnoff for me. Before really even having to get into the details of some of these songs, they are just a non-starter when it is either these goofy, ham-fisted, chunky, bluesy guitar riffs, or these really blunt, really flat, really honestly funny vocal refrains that just go over very poorly. I think maybe half this record, or a little less than half of this record, is just cringy. And while the band is more than talented enough to get in their bag occasionally, and while I think this is definitely an improvement from their last project because of the directions they are willing to wander in sonically being more ambitious, I don't know, I'm just not crazy about this project. I am mixed on it, and it is nothing anywhere close to the band's best material. The new Blake Mills album. Jelly Road was an interesting one for me. I have been a huge fan of Blake Mills as a producer in the past, particularly some of his absolutely awe-inspiring work with Perfume Genius. And this is the first time I've really gotten the opportunity to review one of his singer-songwriter albums. I did review a weird little instrumental offshoot project he did, but after hearing the single Skeleton is Walking, which I really liked, it made me want to dig into this album. And to be honest, I think that was worthwhile, even if I didn't absolutely love every moment on this project, and even if some of the issues I had with singles proved to be issues across the entire album, it was definitely a worthy indulgence that I think provides some very beautiful, stark instrumental moments that are raw in the way that Perfume Genius's arrangements and orchestration, which is often provided by Blake Mills, is much more lush and immaculate. So it was an interesting change of perspective, and there's also just some interesting songwriting on this album. It is a unique project that I think a lot of indie folk and singer-songwriter fans might find something unique to appreciate about. And surprisingly, I kind of agree with the general consensus about the new Swans album, The Beggar, after being labeled a Swans hater for not loving their last, 3 albums as much as the general consensus. I went into this project expecting to be similarly let down despite some positive early buzz, but I actually think this is a decent project. I think it might be their best project in nearly a decade, or maybe even more. I am not as crazy about the massive 40-minute song on this project as some people are, but I do like a lot of the early material, particularly the opening run that this album starts off on is just great. Yes, it's Swans. Yes, it's a little indulgent. Yes, I think they should dial it back at some points, but for the most part, I think that they are hitting on some pretty rewarding, pretty intense, and occasionally pretty freaky things. Plus, I love the whole meta approach that the album can kind of take, and how playful it is about the rumors that this could be one of Swan's last projects. I think that added another dimension of intrigue to me that I really appreciated, especially on return trips through this long project. Another artist that I haven't often been as crazy about as others, PJ Harvey, actually really impressed me with her new record. I wasn't blown away by this album the first couple of times that I heard it, because I think I was diving into the details too much, when this project is best when it is consumed as a whole, because it has a really consistent, very chilling sonic eeriness to it. In my review, I described it as like walking through a snow-capped forest, and that is really the only thing I can feel while listening to this project. It maintains that frigidity, that space, those stark elements throughout, with plenty of intriguing and interesting lyrical detail along the way. That is why some of the occasional snaps to reality and lyrical content on this record did sort of rub me the wrong way at first, but for the most part, just listening to this project in its entirety, front to back, as a whole, I think it is really interesting, sonically compelling, and does a lot with the album format to strengthen these songs and to bring them together into something that is greater than the sum of its parts. The new album from currently incarcerated rapper Young Thug, Business is Business. I was really expecting this thing to be a bunch of throwaways that I didn't particularly appreciate or find all of that memorable, and yet I certainly like this more than Thugger's last project. Firstly, I think allowing Metro Boomin to primarily handle this project was a great idea. I think he's proven time and time again to have a worldliness and poise for assembling track lists that a lot of other executive producer artists really don't have. And as a result, while yes, there are some duds in the track list here and some features that don't go over quite well, for the most part, I enjoyed this project a lot. To me, I think it is a testament of the fact that all these songs, which you have to presume that Thug just had lying around prior to his arrest, assemble into something that is better than what most of his contemporaries are able to record on a full, proper, planned studio album. This is far from Young Thug's most experimental or most indulgent project, and not every song on here will be for everyone. It is pretty typically within the trap lane that Thug albums and mixtapes without a specific concept tend to indulge in, but it's just doing so decently, solidly. I like the record. I think it's all right. I think there's some good highlights, and I've had no trouble revisiting it in the months since it came out. But of course, the biggest hip-hop event of the past few months, easily the biggest hip-hop event of the entire year so far, the long-awaited release of Travis Scott's new album, Utopia. This was always going to be a tricky one to digest, just because of how all over the place Travis Scott records can tend to be, and I did say a couple of things definitively in my review. I am not holding his personal response and culpability of the Astroworld tragedy against him on this project, though I know a lot of people are, and I don't particularly blame them for that, but I went into this thing looking to authentically judge it for its caliber of music. I also said that this was the weakest in taking consideration of the trio of Rodeo, Astroworld, Utopia, and I completely stand by that. However, that's not really a slight against this album, because those are two of the best projects of the trap era of contemporary rap in the past 10 years, and while Utopia is good, it's not that good. And the reason it's not that good, as is the case with so many modern rap albums, is that it is laced with duds. The lead single to this thing, K-Pop, with Bad Bunny and The Weeknd, is so flat, so uninspired. I wish that Travis Scott would have just stuck by his word and not put this song on the album, because it did not need to be here. And yet, that is not even the worst song in this track list. The awful Playboi Carti and Sheck Wes collab on here, despite starting off with an okay verse from Travis, completely falls off the rails. And the weird Young Lean Dave Chappelle crossover is probably the worst song Travis Scott has ever released. But there are also some major highlights, unsurprisingly, both times that James Blake appears on this album. It is wonderful. I have come around big time to the Tizo touchdown featuring Modern Jam. I like the intro track Hyena quite a bit. I also really love the hard-hitting Topia Twins. You do not have to look far at any point on this album to find pretty major highlights. And for that reason, I'm coming away from this thing mostly positive, especially when comparing Travis to almost all of his hip-hop contemporaries. I think if you take the best material this year from Jack Harlow, Lil Durk, Young Thug, Lil Uzi, and Gunna, and face it up against the 15 best songs on Utopia, Travis is going to clear all of them. Finally, in this section, I want to touch on the new Rae Jepson album, The Loveliest Time, a project that I think does not necessarily have the high points of its predecessor. There is no song on here that is as good as Surrender My Heart. However, it is much more consistent, particularly around the middle and back end of this album. It starts to hit a really, really impressive stride, and while I do think that this falls short of the standard set by Emotion and Dedicated, it is an improvement from its sort of sister album from last year, and one that I think sees Carly indulging in some new sounds and styles that I think she slides into very impressively. So no, this may not blow pop music fans away in the same manner that Carly has in the past. It is still a solid album, and one that I think if you've been skipping out on Rae Jepson in recent years, it's more than time to reintroduce yourself. Let's talk best material. I have five projects that I liked quite a bit that have come out recently, starting with my friends in Clearbody, Charlotte-based emo and occasionally shoegaze flavored band that made a long-awaited return. Talked about how much I like some of the singles from this EP, reviewed it alongside some other big rock EPs from this year, and Yeah, this thing is awesome. I like it quite a bit. I've gotten the chance to see Clear Body a few times this year, obviously, and they're great. I definitely recommend this if you haven't really been tapped into this band since they released their album a couple of years ago. Once again, time to get reacquainted. The best album that I have heard this year, anywhere, period. The new ANOHNI and the Johnsons album, My Back Was a Bridge for You to Cross. Wow. 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 What a wonderful experience. I knew this album was going to be good after I heard the 3 amazing singles that were released from it. I listened to the album on a preview and really enjoyed it, so all along I knew that we were in for one of the best album experiences of the year, and yet still just pulling this thing apart, exploring all of its details, all of its nuances, I find it so compelling. Some of the most brash songs here, like Can't, have this layer of emotional intensity that is just front and center on the project. Tracks like Why Am I Alive Now, which are really, really wearing their authentic angst and anger at bigotry and at climate change and society and just the world at large on their sleeve, and it is so immediate and so instantaneous. And yet there are other tracks here like It's My Fault and the brilliant It Must Change that are so reserved, and in the case of It Must Change, occasionally even hopeful, and I would argue through a narrow lens, even inspiring. Combining that with the fact that this album is a sonic tour de force, ANOHNI continues to be one of the most fascinating singers in all of music, and her vocals, the eccentricity and the power of her singing is on full display all over this amazing project. And while the instrumental flourishes here are often more reserved than they were on her much more brash previous solo album, Hopelessness, it fits the mood and the vibe and the politics of this record so much better. This album is so suited for that subtlety and for that reservation, and the results are just a brilliant, wonderful, wonderful track list. I adore this album. I would be really surprised to hear anything that came out this year that I liked more than this project. It is just spectacular. Everyone should listen to this. Everyone should give it a shot because it is marvelous. It is really, really, really excellent. And another album that I knew was going to be really good from the singles, and yet it still managed to even impress me further. The new Julie Byrne album, The Greater Wings. Love Julie, have always been a big fan of hers. I loved her last project a lot, and this might be her best work yet. This is just so beautiful, and though it is so stark, it is so sad, it is also so meaningful and occasionally so bright. I love the songwriting on this record, but I also love the way that songwriting manifests itself into every little moment on this album, where there is a flourish of instrumentation, a presence of vocals that is not already there. The album is so good at saving its most memorable moments for the absolute perfect time, and the result is so many highlights. I will say that this album has the potential to be a little bit too poised, a little bit too quiet, and a little bit too meditative for some, but it is far from one of the critiques that has always followed Julie Byrne about just being sad, slow, indie folk singer-songwriter music. It may appear that way at first, but there is so much detail here, so much nuance emotionally from this record too. It is far from a singular feeling expressed throughout the course of an entire album, and from song to song, the thematic intention of this project can change quite drastically in a way that I found compelling as I sat down to explore these songs in even more detail. I just like this record a lot. I have been listening to it a lot, and it has not waned on me a bit. Great singles, great deep cuts. Love this album. And to the surprise of absolutely no one, I loved the new album from one of my favorite bands of all time, Blur. Brit pop legends turned alt rock in their old age, getting as reflexive and meditative as possible at this point in their career. This is one of their quieter records, with the exception of the single St. Charles Square and the dissonant, hazy, distortion-soaked finale to this project. But yeah, for the most part, this sees Blur at near their emotionally most potent without sacrificing a bit of the incredible songwriting that they've always maintained. So many of the riffs, almost all of the hooks on this album are just sweet, immediate, catchy. They are not rewriting the wheel here, and to some extent, maybe the caliber of fan that I am and have always been of this band plays into how much I appreciate their late career retrospective, but I also found a lot of the songwriting on this thing to be really compelling. I just like every element of this record. Is there a dud or two in the track list? Sure. A song that I wish had a little bit more energy, had a little bit of a better hook? Potentially, but for the most part, I think they are just banging out around 10 real solid songs, and that's really all I can ask for. And finally, perhaps most controversially, even more so than Travis Scott, I like the new Noname album. I like it a lot. And I'm conflicted. Very conflicted about it, because yes, I do think it is probably her weakest project to date, albeit she is one of the best and most talented rap artists alive, so take that with a grain of salt, I guess. But also, she has been in some hot water since the release of this project, primarily for the inclusion of Jay Electronica, who I also have a history of really enjoying his music, though his anti-Semitic politics and how big of a role they play in his music is certainly something I've always been cognizant of and concerned about whenever he makes an appearance. And for Noname, a rapper who has always been so politically savvy and righteous, and who I rightfully heralded for slamming J. Cole really effectively in one of the most one-sided rap beefs of all time, to include J-Elec on the project seems particularly and willfully blind on her part, and the way that she handled it by lashing out at fans and I don't know, not exactly pretending that she was never a political leader in the first place, but really just trying to elevate herself from the same standard that she's held other people to so many times, and pulling similar rhetorical moves to what J. Cole said in his awful response to their beef, Snow on the Bluff. It was all just a little disappointing. And yet, this album is rich, it is compelling, it is full of wonderful hooks, great, meaningful lyrical content, introspection, and observation from Noname. It is talented, it is direct in the way that her music has always been. It is a continuation of the wonderful arc of her career. There is so much to love about this project that it's just a very conflicted space to be in. Especially because the track on which Jay Electronica appears is one of the best on this record, and another one of the best songs on this record, the track Namesake, which is among my favorite songs of the year thus far, has another sequence of controversial lines that sees her calling out artists like Beyonce, Kendrick, Rihanna, in a moment that seems particularly hypocritical to call out Jay-Z while putting fucking Jay Electronica on your album. But even in this song, by the end of it, she makes it a point to identify her own hypocrisy by analyzing the appearance she made at Coachella. It's almost like she is doing all of this while having the awareness to envision herself in the same position and falling victim to the same systemic flaws as a Black artist in the music world, creating entertainment that can occasionally cross paths with nationalism and occasionally, in Noname's case, be directed particularly at white people. I don't know, this album is complicated, and I really do not have the time to make a full dissertation on it. All I will really say is that lyrically, and in terms of her performance, in terms of her songwriting, Noname is once again in her bag. There are so many amazing, memorable moments on this album. So many of the features turn up here and deliver great sung performances and rapped guest verses. there really is just so much to like about this album. It's just the content creates this haze, this cloud that surrounds it in a way that is curious. I'm not going to let it stop me from listening to and enjoying this music, and everyone can make that decision for their own, but it does hold me back from maybe enjoying this album as much as I would have if Noname had been as politically focused and politically righteous as in the past. And that is it. Update in the books. Throat hurdy, need water. There should be a decent steady stream of content coming soon. I don't think I'll be gone for a month. As usual in September, we'll be getting my decade recap videos. We'll be talking about the 50 best songs of 2013. I also have a couple of other videos planned, a more video essay type analysis following the Little Cloud Dead project I did earlier this year. Some stuff I've been writing and some stuff I am looking forward to recording despite my extremely busy schedule. So I should be back soon. Always posting shorts on YouTube and on my TikTok reviewing pop songs as they hit the charts. So check those out if you're curious. And as always, you can read reviews of new albums, which I'm also doing on my blog. All of that stuff linked on the channel in the bio. Thank you for watching.